Welcome, everybody, to Come Back to Love Radio. We are hosted on Dream Visions 7, which is all about humanity and love and bringing more soulful, sacred, loving connections out into the world. And I am so happy to be part of this energy coming out into the world, and so happy today to have my next guest, Dr. Colleen Norris. Thank you so much for being part of this show, part of this radio show, part of this podcast. So happy to have you here.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so much. I'm honored to be here.
You are so welcome. And one of the things that I want to tell the audience first is a little bit about we met only a year or two ago, but that I was
Hmm.
immediately impressed with like your capacity to hold space for yourself and for your loving heart, and also
Mm.
the energy that you bring out into the world as a healer. And your work is so interesting to me because it comes from a couple of different places, so it feels very holistic. And I
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. I know that you've been aware of your intuition inside yourself since you were quite young, I believe, which is
Yes.
really unique. I know for myself, maybe I was aware of it, but it definitely got squashed. And so I'm always so like elated when people actually have that awareness so early and are able to bring it in to the world.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'd love to maybe share just a little bit about what you're doing in the world right now for your work, and then we can dive into one of my favorite topics, actually, anxiety.
Sounds great. Yes. I am a speaker and a network spinal chiropractor, which, if you've never heard of that before, it is a very unique and powerful form of chiropractic. It's a no crack technique, but I'm using my hands. It's a hands on light touch in a very specific location to help the nervous system as a whole unwind from patterns, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, of tension that are blocking the body's ability to heal. So
Hmm.
that's just kind of, I have my own practice in Newbury, Mass. And I've been there about a little over just almost a year and a half. And I also, my specialty really is related to trauma and unhealed trauma, and what the impact that has on the nervous system, and how I use this technique as well as my own experience and knowledge around trauma to help people heal when they've tried many other methods, traditional and non-traditional, that have not helped
Perfect.
them.
Perfect. Yeah, I said anxiety because I know that's a specialty of yours, and we'll get into that later. Of
Yes.
course, where does anxiety come from? It comes from trauma. And so,
Yes.
yeah, so let's begin there. Like, how would you, and trauma is also a really big word, right? Like it's definitely a word that we use now in our Western culture a lot. And it's still for some people a big word, a big challenging word. What does it mean? Do I have trauma? You know, we used to a long time ago in the world of
Mm.
psychotherapy make distinctions between big T traumas and little T traumas. And now, at least in my world, we kind of see it as trauma is trauma is trauma. Like nobody else is defining it except for the person who had the experience.
Yes, and I love what Dr. Gabor Mate, he says his definition of trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you in response of what happens to you. So I love that definition, because really two people can experience the exact same event and it can be traumatic for one and not traumatic for another person. So I think um, you're right. There's a lot there around what it is, but really, most importantly, it's what happens inside of us,
Hmm.
and the beliefs and the everything that we make up about ourselves in response to that event, that really can hold us back in life.
Right, that event or series of events. Yeah, so let's
Exactly.
let's start at that very beginning place. I think that's really helpful to our listeners. Um, how in your experience and your perceptions and awareness,
Mhm.
how would you help somebody identify that they even have trauma?
Yeah, so my brain works in a very unique way. When I have someone come into my office, the first time that I'm talking to them, I do a very detailed history about I want to know not only what's happening in their life right now, like what symptoms they're experiencing, but I go back to childhood. What was your relationship like with your parents? What kind of things did you experience? Because I think from that place, it's like it's important to understand that when our body goes through and our nervous system goes through certain events, that lives inside of our body, and so that can then show up later in the form of like anxiety, in the form of chronic pain, migraines, back issues, neck pain. Like, so there's really, I start wherever someone is and whatever they're presenting with, and I help them to connect the dots with, okay, why are you experiencing, you know, oh, this neck issue started when your mom passed away, and then kind of just helping to connect all of the dots together to link why, what's showing up in their life and how it could be related to something unhealed from the past.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. So it sounds like your assessment time is very in depth, very, very deep.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
are people coming because they're experiencing physical pain, emotional pain? So, what kind of, somebody might be experiencing something that's uncomfortable, but not necessarily know that it's related to trauma, right? Or a traumatic experience or experiences that they've had. Might be like, oh, my hip
Yes.
hurts, my right hip hurts.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I love that question. So, like, so often, like, my first question is, okay, was there an accident or injury? Right. So, we want to rule out, was there something? And even if there was an accident or injury, that also doesn't mean that there isn't an emotional component related to the event as well. But
Right.
we gotta just kind of rule out. So, oftentimes people will show up at my office usually because they've tried all the other traditional methods, and they've done the pain medication, or they've done
Mm.
um, you know like physical therapy or traditional chiropractic or acupuncture or these other modalities that are wonderful. I'm not saying anything negative about them, but it hasn't moved the needle for them in improvement in their health. And so usually when someone finds me, they're looking at something deeper. They're looking for the deeper, like, okay, why is this not healing? What's going on? What's really going on here? And thankfully nowadays, a lot of people are now more aware of the nervous system and its role in health, and if you're able to heal or not. So a lot of people are coming in saying, you know what, I've done everything except really heal my nervous system. So
Mm.
it's kind of really cool that I have so many people coming in, really aware of that. And so they're just like, this is the missing piece that I haven't addressed yet.
Wow. So I'll just say, like, I know our listeners are going to be from all over the world, and you have a very local practice, but this is such an education actually, because I think when most people think about chiropractics, they're like, oh, I have a physical injury. Um,
Totally.
but the way you're talking about it is really completely different than that. Like I said, like my hip
Very.
hurts, my elbow hurts, my back is out of alignment, maybe, something's out of alignment. And okay, seek out a chiropractor. But it sounds like what you're really aware of, and we'll talk about it some more, is actually what happens in the nervous system and how that impacts the whole body and our health. So, is there more to say about that piece around what does happen to the nervous system in any kind of trauma?
Yes.
And yeah, how does that impact? Like, how does that affect us?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really kind of like the pinnacle of what you're asking, is like the pinnacle of everything that I do.
Mm.
So when I first started as a chiropractor, I did do the traditional cracking, right? So in that traditional, we're like, let's put this bone, quote unquote, back into place. So we're looking at a very local level, like, oh, I'm addressing the neck here, or I'm addressing the lower back or the hip or something like that.
Right.
But in The way that I work now is I'm not looking to do any of that. I'm looking at the nervous system as a whole. I'm
Mm.
looking at where is the nervous system? Is it in some chronic cycle of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn?
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
And and the answer is yes, because
Yeah, I was gonna
everyone,
say yes.
yes, because if we look at all the things in our society, all the things happening, right? It's very
Yes.
rare that someone wouldn't be in some kind of cycle of that. So when I'm doing my assessment, I'm looking at, okay, where is this person's nervous system? What are the patterns that the coping mechanisms their nervous system has been using to survive? So that can look like, oh, I disconnect from my body. So I stay in my head and I disconnect from my body so I don't have to feel anything because it feels unsafe. All right. That's just one example.
Okay.
So in that example, then the nervous system is in whatever version of fight or flight it's in. You're not going to. So people are walking around from in a state of disconnection, and they're doing these other modalities, even if they're taking medication or they're doing like a juice cleanse or they're doing supplements and all of this stuff. Until that disconnection is, until the reconnection happens with the body, you're really not going to have long lasting healing, in my experience,
Hmm.
because that does not solve the disconnection. So it's like the nervous system, what the disconnection happens because there are things from the past that are living in the body. So when we go through something at the age of 5 and we don't have the tools and resources to process it, the body holds that energy for us,
Mm.
and that takes up space in our nervous system. So it's like, okay, let me hold this here. So then all of a sudden, maybe our posture shifts where we become, we hunch forward a little bit in a form of protection or defense of our heart chakra. And
Mm.
then we carry that with us throughout. And then eventually over time, it's like, oh, I've got a back issue. I've got this neck issue. And it's not going to be solved by trying to force the body back into some place of alignment. It's
Yeah.
going to be solved by helping the body feel safe. So when I'm making a contact, my main goal is to shift the nervous system out of any place of fight or flight into the parasympathetic state of the nervous system, where the body feels safe and the body's main priority is healing.
Mm. The body, I'm just going to repeat that, where the body
Yeah.
feels safe
Yes.
and in that state of parasympathetic, which is the relaxed state of being, the body feels safe and the priority of the body is healing.
Yes.
That,
Because it feels safe,
yeah.
it can heal.
Not only can it heal, but what I heard you say is that the priority of the body is healing, which of course it is.
Yes.
It makes sense, but we don't think about that.
We don't think about that.
Mm.
And that's the key component. And here's even what, in my opinion, what's really cool about the technique is that when I'm helping the body shift in that parasympathetic state, I'm helping the body's natural healing ability. In chiropractic, we call it innate intelligence.
Mm.
I'm helping that innate intelligence come online. And then that intelligence is then unleashed and it goes throughout the body and it makes its adjustments and it makes its shifts and its changes. So I'm not actually doing that for someone. So their bodies is doing that for them.
Doing it for themselves. Wow. Okay.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. Well, I want to
Yes.
back up from here because, first of all, wow, not a lot of people know about network chiropractics, which is that the no crack methodology that you talked about. And I know it's actually got many, many layers to it, from the
It does.
physical to the
Yes.
emotional to the spiritual. But let's back up for a moment and then bridge back here.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, because I just want to acknowledge that there's so much stress and tension and anxiety, fear. These are all the same words for the same thing, in
Mm-hmm.
our culture right now. And there's a lot going on in the world, you know. there's a lot going on politically in the United States. There's a lot going on in the world in terms of wars. There was, and other things. And I know we're recording and your episode is a few weeks from this moment today. And
Mm,
still, there's a lot that's been going on for many years, but especially in the last year and a half, let's say. And anxiety level has just, skyrocketed, especially, well, I don't know. I mean, certainly pronounced in the younger generation, teenagers and 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. So I just want to say that, living in this sort of fight or flight and the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight state of being, heart racing, contraction, a lot of fear, racing
mhm.
thoughts. I guess I
Yes.
just want to say to like any of our listeners, to just invite a moment of self-reflection and self-identification of, are you in that state predominantly? Or do you see,
Mm,
just to the people listening, do you feel yourself in that state of anxiety and anxiousness half of every day or all day every day? How are your stress levels? And just to
mm,
know that when we're in that sympathetic space, it's kind of and the opposite of what you just said. Like when we're in parasympathetic, we have that innate wisdom. Our bodies are prioritizing healing. When we're not in that state, our bodies are not prioritizing healing and health and well-being. So, do you want to say
right.
about what gets prioritized when we're in that? Because I honestly think that, and it's funny
Yeah.
because today I've been talking a lot about how we're with a lot of my clients happen to be the topic today, which relates to comfort with discomfort.
Mm,
We're comfortable with our levels of discomfort because we're just used to them. It's like, putting on an old,
yes.
and
Yes.
so this way of being in the world of anxious, anxious, go, 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 stress, 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 fear, and anxiety, it's like people are just used to living that way in that state of being without really recognizing it. So, the invitation for those listening was like self-assessment, self-inquiry. And then
Yes.
B, the question for you is like, what is happening in the body? What is the body prioritizing when we're in that state?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So the body is prioritizing survival and protection.
Mm, yeah.
So it's like, again, back in the day when there's, the saber-toothed tiger around,
Mm,
could be around any corner. It's like, okay, you come around the corner and there's a tiger and you're like, all right,
mm,
I don't need to digest my food right now. I don't need to heal right now. I need to run
mm,
or fight. And so all the resources go to that. So the digestion stops. We're not, the immune system shuts down. The parts of the brain that are like critical thinking and problem solving, that all shuts down. It's like instinct. Boom. I'm either going to fight or am I going to run?
mm,
And that's again, the problem is that the saber-toothed tiger then becomes, it's a family member, it's your boss, it's
mm.
your a coworker or a loved one or something where, behind every corner it seems as though there's some kind of perceived, real or perceived threat.
Mm.
And then again, you get, like you're saying, you get so used to it, people get so used to it, they don't even know their shoulders are up here in their ears,
Right.
and they're walking around and they're like a stiff rock board
Mm.
until they come on my table in some way. Commonly people will say, this is the first time I felt peace in years,
Wow.
and
Wow.
their shoulders drop down and
Wow.
they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how different I feel, because they're so used to it, unfortunately,
Right.
that they just keep, it's like being in a hamster wheel. They just keep getting, around and round we go. And then the body in that state, right? It's okay if we're in that state for, the 10 minutes or half hour that something is happening. But then all this over time, if you don't know strategies to get out of that place, then you're just in that for sometimes for days, weeks, months, years,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
decades.
Yeah. Yes. And before we take a commercial break, I just want to link that to the message of come back to love for a moment, because when we're in that
Mm,
state that you just described, it's really difficult and challenging to love ourselves, never
yes,
mind be in a relationship with somebody else.
totally,
Yeah, that the stress and
totally.
anxiety and the all of that energy just doesn't give us the spaciousness and the relaxation to come back to our own hearts and to care for ourselves in action, and also to care for other people. So, yeah, it's a really important topic.
Yeah, when we're disconnected from ourselves, how are we able to connect with another?
Right, exactly. So we'll pause right in that very poignant moment. I'll be back in just a moment after a commercial break. So we're talking about how when we're in sympathetic, nervous, nervous, no,
Mhm.
when we're in our sympathetic nervous system, we are nervous and anxious and in survival mode. And it makes it very difficult to pause, to love ourselves, and to love other people. And you were starting to say, um, how do we, if we can't even be that for ourselves, it's really hard to be that way for other people. And I just want to remind the audience that we're speaking with Dr. Colleen Norris, who is an expert in network chiropractics and in looking at trauma, how it impacts the body, how it impacts the nervous system, and how to recognize that the trauma you've experienced is actually impacting the body and the nervous system. Of course, it is. And then
Mhm.
I know that you work with techniques to support the shift out of sympathetic. I'm going to ask you a really strange question. Do people
Okay.
really get to parasympathetic, to the nervous
Yes.
relaxed state?
Yes.
And does it last? I know it happens on the table because you just said somebody had said to you recently, like, wow, I haven't been this relaxed maybe ever,
Yes.
which I can totally understand, having experienced network myself.
Hmm.
What's your experience with it actually continuing and shifting, like really making change that lasts?
Yeah, it's incredible because the great thing that we know about the nervous system is the neuroplasticity. We know that changes can happen. We know that we can make new networks, we can make new neural pathways, which is beautiful, right?
Yes.
So that's how change can happen. And so when we're priming our nervous system to get out of that sympathetic, like I said, and to go into the parasympathetic, this parasympathetic is all about connection. It's all about healing. So in that place, it's a whole, you're literally processing energy and information in a radically different way than you are when you're in survival. And so in this place, you start, like I was talking to a patient today, and they were saying, oh my gosh, I used to get so triggered by this one person and by this one specific thing. And it doesn't, I actually have now the space to pause and respond instead of react. And
Wow.
they were saying, yeah, they were saying that like someone had said, oh, you hurt my feelings when you said this. And they said, normally I would have bolted. I would have been like, yep, bye-bye. And she goes, I was able to stay in that moment with the discomfort of, wow, someone is bringing this to my attention. This feels uncomfortable, but I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna stay with it. And then she was able to see what they were saying and take accountability and responsibility for her part in it. So that is things I hear all the time.
Wow.
It's a common experience where it's like, this used to be so triggering, and now it's not a trigger anymore. It doesn't have the same impact on me.
It doesn't
And
act
I
nervous system.
exactly. And I will say too that um, a lot of my patients that had been patients for a while leading up to the election, they overall the theme was, I feel so much calmer than I would have, even though it was not the outcome I wanted. I feel so much calmer than I would have. I would have like just lost it before. But because of the work I've been doing on my nervous system, I know everything's going to be okay. And I'm just using that as just one example. That could be
Yeah,
family, that could be, you could put anything in there, but they're just, these are long lasting shifts that happen where the same things that have triggered you before, it's just like the trigger dissolves.
wow. Wow. Well, that's really massive. That's a massive statement to make, that it actually is an effective modality. It's effective to notice what's happening in your body, the impact, and then at least, in the modality that you use, and we'll talk about it in a little bit broader way in a moment. Um, but people are having lasting effects on their nervous system. They're calming down. They're taking things more in stride. They're not reacting in the way that, if we've got these like quick trigger reactions that take us out of love very quickly with ourselves, with each
Yes.
other. And
Yes.
yeah, to have that shift happen where people have a greater capacity to take a breath and say, oh, wait a minute, how do I want to respond versus how I'm reacting? That's huge.
Yes.
That's massive.
It's huge. It,
Yeah,
it
it
just,
is.
I feel like there's so many experiences that I hear that have these little ripple effects,
Mhm.
and how someone is able to show up for themselves and how they're able to show up for others in a very different way than they have before.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and showing up for
Mhm.
yourself. I mean, this is at the crux of the um, self-love work.
Yes.
We can't, we have to have the space to show up for ourselves so that we can actually tend to the places in ourselves that are blocking us from love and give ourselves what I like to say, require and desire in order to heal and be a fully loving uh, participant in this world right now, you know?
Yeah, and to that point, I will say one of the biggest patterns I see is the people pleasing, which we could
Mm,
call the fawn part of the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn,
yes.
where what it's wired in your nervous system that you have to put the needs of others above your own in order to survive, in order to be loved and accepted. This is one of the most common patterns that I see, and it stems most likely, in most cases, from childhood, where the child had to put the needs of the parent above their own need in order to survive, and then that just follows them wherever they go. And now they're at a place where that pattern can show up as migraines. It can show up as all different kinds, autoimmune issues, like you name it, it could show up in cancer, any different way.
Yes.
But what's required is for the nervous system to remove those associations with love and acceptance from other people's approval. And when that shifts, that's another huge shift that I see in people, that they've almost worked themselves to into the ground to try to get a validation and approval from others.
Mhm.
And we all know that that is a game you will never win. But when your nervous system is attached to that, um, being able to free yourself from that, it changes everything, because then you see, oh wow, actually my needs are important, and what is important is that I validate them and that I meet those needs, and that I don't need anyone else to do that for me. That's a totally different life.
Yes, that is a totally different life. Yeah, I wonder, I have a personal experience with that. I wonder if you want to share any of your personal experiences with that. Is that a dynamic that
Mm.
showed up for you in your life, or was there one similar? Because hearing personal stories is so valuable to people to see like where you were, where you came from, where you are now.
Yes, I 100%. I mean, I
Mm.
think in so many different little ways, that was definitely one of my patterns was I need to make other people happy and I need to be loved and accepted by other people. And if I'm not, then I'm nothing, basically. So I think in so many different ways in how I've lived my life in the past, where even if we just look at business, like how I used to run my business, it was always okay, what's best for like neglecting my own needs.
Other
All
people.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Let me be available anytime,
Yes.
day or
Yes.
night. You
Yes.
know, let
Guilty.
me,
Mhm.
right? Like, let me go above and beyond and let me bend over backwards for you and let me, like take over responsibility for you.
Mhm.
And holy cow, that is the fastest way to burn out that I know of.
Yes. Absolutely. 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 Yes, we're going to pause right there for a
Okay.
quick commercial break, and I can share some of my story when we get back. Yes, we're talking with Dr. Colleen Norris and myself about, now we're talking about people pleasing, which is a very, very well-known topic out there in the world. I mean, I just did a whole class on it a couple months ago, actually a 3-week class with predominantly focused on that archetype, but also way of being in the world as a people pleaser and
Mm.
how it comes to be, which you described well. I'll say for me, you had sort of referenced it more generally, but for me, because my mother was sick when I was young, it became about making her happy. You know, she was
Mm.
sick, she died when I was young, and the energy in the family and in certainly in myself and probably also my sister was, we got to try to like make this better. So the energy became
Mm.
all about somebody else and my needs,
Yes.
because there was a big crisis in the family and a lot of chaos. My needs were put aside, and I learned very quickly put those needs aside because those needs are just rocking the boat and making things worse. And so that was what I came to believe. That was what I started to live into, that truth, which of course is a misbelief. And then I have basically spent the rest of, my life, the past 50 years unwinding and untangling that mess.
Yes.
But to your point, that people pleasing is, it's a challenging one for people. And I can say it was a challenging one for myself because there's so much positive reinforcement.
Yes.
You
You're
know,
such a good person.
yes, thank you so, so much for doing this for me. You changed my life. I'm so grateful. And those things are genuine and valid. And thank God people are receiving such amazing benefits. But where we take it, right, is something
Mm.
else. If I take it as, okay, well, now I need to keep doing these things for other people, and not
Right.
tending to myself, my body's requirements, my body's desires, my being's requirements, and my being desire, the desires my being has. Um, then I'm not bringing myself along for the ride, and I'm not filling my own cup. I'm spending lots of time trying to fill other people's cups. And
Absolutely. When it's like when there's a part of it that it's a detriment to ourselves, if we're
Mhm.
giving or doing something and it's a negative, there's some kind of negative consequence or detriment to ourselves. I think that's where we go into, I would say, like self-betrayal,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
that's where it gets sticky.
Yes.
And the consequences.
Yeah, self-betrayal. Those are powerful words. Powerful, powerful words.
Yes.
And I would invite our audience that's listening to just do a little self-inquiry in this moment. Like, where are the places in your life And there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, there's no good or bad because to me, we're just human and we do these things and this is how we grow. But where are the places
Yes.
in your life, for those of you listening in, where you give really well to yourself and it feels very loving? And where are there places where there's betrayal of self? And that's just a great place to look. And we're at the beginning of 2025 right now. So, you know,
Mm.
I don't like the whole resolution thing, but somebody said to me recently, like, is it resolution or revolution? And like, what if we had a revolution of not betraying
Mm.
ourselves, like in any way, you know?
Yes.
Like, what does my body require to eat? What do I desire to eat? What do I require and desire to see visually? How does my body want to move?
Yeah.
Not
And
just,
I want,
yeah,
oh, and I just want to bring up, so this
yeah,
is something I believe you had taught me, was around a way to know if we're betraying ourselves is like, will we do that inquiry of, does this feel light or heavy?
yes, yeah. Let's talk about that tool.
Yes, I love that tool because that is so powerful. I think it will be really helpful for people.
Yes, me too. Do you want to say more about it?
Well, I just know when I heard it from you, it was like, it was like the self inquiry of, okay, let's say you're invited to go out to dinner, with friends, and maybe normally are like, oh yeah, 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 but maybe you've had a super busy week and it just actually your body requires you to rest. So when you tune in, you can say, oh, does this feel light? If I were to think about going out with my friends tonight, does that feel light or heavy?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's one of my favorite tools. It comes from Access Consciousness, which was founded by Gary Douglas and Dr. Dane here. So I want to give them credit. And yes, it's an energy awareness tool that many, many, many people use, but that's where I learned it. And
Mm.
so there's a sensitivity that can be established over time because I didn't have, even though I was very energy aware in my life, extremely empathic and aware of energy, this distinction between if something feeling light and therefore more aligned with myself and my truth, and something feeling heavy and therefore not aligned with my truth, took a little bit of time to develop because at first I couldn't really feel it. Somebody would say, well, is it light or heavy?
Yes.
I'd be like, I don't know. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. But now I feel it. I feel this lightness, usually on the left side. It's kind of up here. And when something feels heavy, maybe for me, it's more on my right side and it just feels, ugh. And sometimes I'll feel like a contraction. And I was just
Mm.
working with a client right before this doing an Akashic record reading, and she had a question for me. She had a question really for herself, but she had a question also for the records. Um, and it was just like is this better or this better? And immediately I
Hmm.
felt like, oh yeah, this first one I felt really tingly and it felt really joyful.
Mm.
And the other one was like, it felt heavy. And she also had a lot of words around it, like, well, I don't know if I really want to do that one because of this and because of that. And I'm not really sure this was, the thing. And I don't know, maybe I'm being resistant to it. There's just like a lot of like story around it, which we often
Yeah.
we often create. And
Yes.
but it was the story and the words and the things that might sound like excuses or questions, it all felt very heavy. But the first
Mm.
piece was like, oh, should I do this? It was like, oh yeah, do that, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so that's a huge tool. It's so potent and it's such a wonderful way to guide. And before we go on another commercial break, I want to tie it back to sympathetic and parasympathetic and our nervous systems.
Hmm.
Because if
Yes.
we choose things that are heavy, it's okay to choose things that are heavy. Nothing's going to happen. The earth isn't going to open up and swallow you up. And
Right.
those can be things that create disconnect, like you said, from, head and body, let's say mind and body. They can create stress. They can create the sympathetic response in the body if it's not fully aligned. When we do
Yes.
something that's light, there's usually ease, it's,
Yes.
yeah.
And sometimes you don't know until you already say yes or no. and then you
Yes.
can reflect back, which is something I've learned too, because it's like if you try to get it perfect, um,
Yeah.
that can be a stressor as well. And sometimes I don't know until I'm like, oh, now I can look back and say, okay, now, and that just gives you more information of for the next time.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, there's no right or wrong. It's all information. And I know for people that are very experiential like myself, I often do have to step into something and then go, okay, wait,
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
actually light, I'm going to take a
yes,
step back, which is why I also am a big fan of changing your mind.
yes,
Yeah,
same.
yeah. All right, we're going to take our last commercial break and we'll be right back. This has been such an amazing conversation. I love actually how we traversed um, the nervous system, trauma, neuroplasticity, which is a favorite topic of mine, which you probably know, and then bringing that into how we love ourselves, how we care for ourselves or not, places where we're able to love ourselves, places an invitation to look at self-betrayal, which is
Mm,
so hard, such a deep and painful, often painful place to look, but so important. Um,
hmm.
and then to bring in the my favorite tools of light and heavy in terms of making decisions and knowing what feels good to the nervous system and what doesn't feel good to the nervous system, and retraining not only through the work of network chiropractics, but also all these other tools of like retraining ourselves to be in parasympathetic. If I train myself to tune into light or heavy, and I mostly choose light, I'm not going to 100% choose light because I'm just probably not going to hit that mark every time. But if I mostly
Hmm.
choose light and it's where I'm supposed to be, where my soul is supposed to be, travel to, let's say, then I'm in a more loving space with my body, which is the parasympathetic. That gives my body the
Yes.
opportunity to heal whatever is out of balance. I mean, it's all, I love this conversation because it's so mind, body, spirit, all in one.
Yes, exactly. It's all together.
So beautiful. Yeah. So I think you have something special to offer our listeners. And I know you have just something, so many special gifts to offer the
Oh,
world.
thank you. Thank
So
you.
grateful. So
Thank
grateful for
you.
what
Yeah.
you. Yeah. So what do you want to share with our audience?
Yes. So there is a free quiz on my website
Mhm.
that talks about the number one reason why you have not been able to heal from a chronic health issue.
Mm,
And that quiz takes you through so that you understand which state of the parasympathetic you are stuck in, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
mm.
And so that information, then again, it's giving you more information. And then I have a lot of follow up emails and things like that to really help you understand more of where you're at and why you're in that place and how to move forward.
Interesting. Yeah, I thought about asking you this question earlier, but I'm going to ask you now. So, first of all, I encourage everybody to check out your website, all the things that you have to offer there. There's a lot of information for people, whether they're local in Massachusetts or not. And
Exactly.
of course, the self-assessment tool is always so helpful to look inside it, get a real look at what's really going on. And the question that comes to mind is there I guess I know I'm guessing the answer is yes, because it's why you have the quiz. But I wonder if you
Hmm.
could speak to the difference just briefly, like between fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, because it sounds like you're seeing them separately as if they each have their own unique impact on the body and on our being, and perhaps are also treated differently, maybe in network, but maybe also with other modalities. It sounds like it makes a difference to know, am I in fight? Am I in flight? Am I in freeze? Am I in fawn? Do you know? Or rather
Yes.
lumping
And
it all together.
yes. And so So the answer is yes, and yes, it matters, and no, it's like it matters and it doesn't matter. It matters. The reason it does matter is because, again, I believe in bringing self-awareness. When we understand what our patterns, our typical patterns are,
Yeah.
now we have more information, right? We get more awareness and we have more knowledge, and then that puts us in a place of being able to make a different choices. So yes, that does matter, and we can also be in any one of those places at any given point in time. It's not like we only go into one of those places, but typically there will be one that we kind of rely on the most, is
Uh,
what I've my experience is. And that again is like, oh yes, there's this one of those really is the like main one that I rely on for my survival. And again, I just think that's really important information to know about ourselves, and then to know how to grow forward.
mhm.
Now, when I'm working on someone on my table, it doesn't matter which version they're in. I'm going to work on them on the table the same, but there may be little different things that I say as I'm working on them depending on where they're at. So it matters and it doesn't all at the same
Mhm.
time.
That makes perfect sense, of course. And from an internal family systems perspective, and most of my listeners know
Mm,
that that's one of my main orientations in life for the healing I did on myself, and also the work that I bring into the world through Come Back to Love. Those to me, those would be like four distinct parts of the self. And one of them,
yes.
the one of the main protective parts that comes forward, and it's really helpful. So for our listeners, just to kind of bring us way back to the beginning, like, was there trauma or traumatic circumstances, and how has that impacted you physically, emotionally, mentally, in your beliefs, maybe spiritually? And then looking at how specifically it's impacted, like you said, what's the sort of predominant pattern? Do you normally go into freeze? And that's great to know about yourself, because if you do normally go into freeze, you can eventually recognize it and say, and like you
Mm-hmm.
said, with work and the capacity to pause eventually, oh, I'm in freeze, and then learn the tools
Yes.
to actually get out of freeze and out of that part of the brain that isn't thinking clearly with the prefrontal cortex, and be able to then to continue because when we freeze, we're not participating, right? So if we're coming out of freeze, then we're able to participate
Exactly.
in choices for ourselves. So that all makes a lot of sense. And I think the self-awareness piece is huge in terms of that, and noticing what your
Yes.
patterns are and where you normally go. And like you said, we don't always go to that one place, but I think we all have a tendency to go to one or the other. Yeah.
Absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. Beautiful. Beautiful. So I'm going to recommend everyone listening, listen again, because there's so much information here. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to really suggest everybody go to Dr. Colleen Norris's website, which will be posted in the information below where you're listening, also on the podcast description. And then you'll be able to take that free quiz and learn about yourself. And it sounds like you also have, a lot of follow-up information you'll be sharing. So it's really helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you
Yes.
so much, Colleen. Thank you so much to our listeners. Thank you for being here and being invested in coming back to love with yourself, and listening to this radio show that provides so many different techniques and tools and stories, human stories of overcoming obstacles and coming back to love with yourself, so that you can share it with others and share it with the world. Such an important part of our life and our living right now. So thank you so
Mm,
much for everybody for being,
thank you.
and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.